Hi everyone, welcome to Off the Podium. I have a special guest with me today, composer, clarinetist, great musician, Gleb. Welcome.
Thank you, it's a pleasure.
Why don't we start with the generic question I ask to all the guests, a little bit about the background, the heritage, and anything else you'd like us to know about you.
Sure. Well, I was born and raised, I guess, partially in Minsk, Belarus. I was pretty Minsk-bound for the first 12 years of my life. So I went to the state preparatory, kind of got into classical music sort of as residue from, my grandparents, my Soviet grandparents, that really thought I should, give something a try.
Yeah.
There were unused bayans and pianos, just in everyone's house, and I just needed to go through something. But the first couple of concerts that made an impact on me were organ and clarinet concerts, and all of them featured mostly contemporary music. So the sort of the striving for the newer, at least wanting to hear newer things, has been, I think, instilled in me since very, very early childhood. I didn't grow up going to many symphonic concerts, so, it was mostly solo and chamber oriented, and one clarinetist in particular was very inspiring. He was on TV all the time. He was one of the very few people who toured outside the country, so he commissioned many local composers, and and I admired him. I wanted to study with him. I studied with him, and then he got maybe a little bit too old school and a little bit too rough for the 21st century, and I decided to switch teachers in the last year before I left the country, and that was interesting because the teacher was very nice, but then at the same time he gave me many opportunities to kind of show the world what I was able to accomplish technically, but we didn't really go much beyond that. And then my parents got jobs and kind of pulled me over to Frederick, Maryland, and I finished my growing up in Maryland, in Baltimore, D.C. area, and went to Peabody for my bachelor's in clarinet, went to Yale for my master's in clarinet, then took a break, got some accumulated compositions recorded, which was tough. They were, to be kind, impractical, and sort of tried to broaden my horizons, and here I am doing my PhD in composition at Brandeis.
Well, before we get to all of that, it's interesting how I've only done a few of these interviews, podcasts at this point, and there's already so many connections. For example, a previous guest, George Jackson, was saying hello. He said
I just saw it on Twitter literally 5 minutes ago.
He said it's been ages. And of course, Mark Eads, who recommended you. And right away, the question is, how did that collaboration come about? Because I know you performed his piece, from what I read.
Yeah. So Mark, it's crazy because Mark is one of those people that is seemingly everywhere. I don't know how he does it, but the amount of music he produces and how active he is just in the social media world, he's an extremely social being. So soon after I've performed my first I had my first documented performances of pieces in the New Complexity vein sort of go up online. I think he got in touch with me, and and we've been chatting back and forth ever since. But that must have been around 2013 or something like that. 2013, 2014. That he must have seen either my playing Richard Barrett or Michael Finnessy or something, some slightly younger New Complexity names, I guess. But it all happened at Soundscape Festival in Italy. It was a wonderful platform for me. I haven't been back since 2015, but they really gave me opportunities to try out things and document some pieces that I didn't have an opportunity, to record and film otherwise. Now everything's super accessible, and and I'm in the university with a great video and audio setup, and and of course now it's videos galore. I upload something new once a month, maybe twice a month even. So, but they also gave me the opportunity to present and learn Mark's E-flat clarinet concerto as part of a workshop where we tried doing this asynchronous thing and kind of work out how do we do this? Where is our judgment, lose validity, like, is this supposed to, because the piece was just challenging in so many ways and caused a very split reaction, and there was a furor sort of after it happened, and there were boos, and it was nuts.
But that's great, because that's not something you see quite often in the classical concert halls, at least not in the U.S.
Well, in the U.S., I've what's really interesting is that I've had a chance to be booed 3 times.
You kidding?
Part of performances, and actually all 3 of them happened at Spoleto Festival in Charleston, South Carolina. And that is, because the audience is very varied, and it consists of college kids and regular Charleston population and Wall Street retirees and things like that. And a lot of people are completely unprepared for, say, a Lachenmann opera, like we did last year, and we had as many as almost 100 walkouts. We got booed numerous times at the festival, but that is a special place. Usually nothing like that. But surely I really think that piece of Mark's was testing, and it was provocative, and it was very difficult to work out until we put it together. We kind of put our trust in Mark, and just do what he asked us to do on the page, and just play the thing, look at the phone, not really interact with each other, which is another, it's a weird experience. It's kind of, trying to warm up before an orchestral audition. You're trying to not pay attention to all of these people that are in the room. So, it was great. And, I think, and then we had a wonderful flutist over at Brandeis, the first year I was at Brandeis, Carlton Vickers. He teaches, I think, at University of Utah, and he came with a whole gigantic new complexity program. And I think he played a James Erber quarter-tone alto flute piece. I think he played an alto piece by Jason Eckhart. He played Unity Capsule, as well as Ferneyhough's Sisyphus Redux for quarter-tone alto flute. And then he played Mark's Streaming, which was, it was like 20 minutes. It was enormous. And and I ended up hosting Mark. So, so we got to get a little bit closer while he was here, because, we needed a place to stay, I guess. And it was a really nice conglomeration of all of these wonderful composers that are, I think, really underplayed right now, I think, especially in the U.S. It was a special experience.
Well, as much as I hate that you were booed, I'm actually happy about that. I'm happy that the audience is outspoken about what they feel. So it's nice, even if it's negative. It's nice to see that from the classical audiences, which sometimes could be very passive in their approach.
I can't blame them for that piece. It is heavy. It's 10 tons of lead, dropping on you. That piece, it's heavy. It's awesome.
I was going to ask about being an accomplished clarinet player and a composer. How do you manage these two worlds? You do so much in playing clarinet, you do so much composing and participating in all these different festivals, orchestras, chamber ensembles. How do you manage all of this?
Barely. It's hectic. It's hectic. I've had mishaps where I was, close to missing engagements because it just things don't always register, no matter how many times I remind myself. But with composing, I'm kind of trying to tone it down because in terms of how long it takes me to work on something and what I produce. Because last year I didn't really pace myself, and I got into a couple academies, and I just needed to write some pieces for festivals as well. And in addition, I think I had 2 commissions to write, and I produced a little bit too much music for my own liking. Actually, no, I'm lying. Three commissions. That's even worse. I've never written so much, and I've thrown out majority of what I've done last year, and especially the festival and the commissioned music, unfortunately, It has nothing to do with the players. It's just with the constraints I wasn't able to achieve the aesthetic and technical level of novelty, really, I think, that I was expecting from myself. And they were kind of conservative, distilled versions of successful pieces that I've already done. I'm really trying to tone it down, and I just kind of went back, and I'm working on polishing off a piece that I started last summer when I was at a residency in Iceland. I just posted a video of it on my YouTube channel, but it's a 45-minute piece for clarinet and electronics. And the electronics I did mostly in studio. So I recorded the dry part, and then I'm sort of composing and I'm notating and I'm tweaking things as I go. Because for a super neat, perfect kind of documentation, I definitely didn't want to have something that was a ready live product and record everything live as it is. That's going to be, a large portion of my year, really doing that piece. And honestly, beyond that, there's not a whole lot that, I have on my plate right now. I think I've pushed enough players to the limit that they're not really asking me to write. I think all of my close friends that have asked me for a piece already, they know that they shouldn't. Again, I don't mean to belittle myself. It's just I pursue ambitious projects that are usually logistically extremely difficult. And with I think with little to no commissions, I can pursue kind of a passion project. And there were a few things that I declined to do just because I want to produce something big and give myself a little bit of time to digest what happened in the past couple of years, because it's been a lot, and a lot of it I feel was maybe a little bit too shallow.
Orchestras in the US have been folding for a couple of years, and composers, at least from my experience, I talk to all these young composers and they say that primarily focus on solo or chamber repertoire, or maybe electronic music and a soloist like you were talking about. Is there a future for composers and orchestral music?
You want to publish my opinion?
If you're willing to talk about it, I'm okay with it. If you don't want to talk about it, I'm completely fine. I'll just say my opinion in a few words, but you can go ahead if you want to talk.
I can weigh in, and obviously this is a very complicated matter. Because I simply cannot wish to eradicate something, especially when it's a long-standing tradition.
One thing I was going to say is that I even mentioned to Mark in the podcast with him, I was upset with that new project he has because it has no conductor.
Now that you've brought up Mark's project and, the absence of conductor in that whole thing, obviously that is, it's a complicated political matter. It's a big concept because, I guess it's maybe not so much that it's the superiority of this one person and the superiority of the position or the importance of the position. I really think it's down to the pay discrepancy, right?
And I'm happy you said this. I'm very happy you said this.
Bothersome right now. So, but having come out of, I guess, the classical world, and and I still play some standard rep every once in a while. It's just I want to keep it to a nice proportional ratio to like the general clarinet rep, right? I feel like the amount of orchestras needs to reflect the actual interest and need for them, because it's not like no one needs them or no one wants to hear them. People want to hear them, but most certainly it's not the same percentage of the population that it used to be. And it serves a different purpose. And I feel like a lot of orchestral players feel a certain level of entitlement, to be recognized for doing something very important culturally. And I think the most important step in being kind of a successful and I think a satisfied and just a happy orchestral musician these days is to realize that really there's a need only for a few of those positions. There's a need for only a few of those specialists. And they need to acknowledge that they engage in preservation, that it's a conservation project at this point. And conservation projects also have their artistic worth, but I'm not exactly sure that they will be progressive in their values and their inherent politics to kind of help our society right now to move forward. So I'm not a believer in the orchestral tradition. I'm a believer in preserving the orchestral tradition because, it needs to be documented. So that's really what I'll say. Most likely I'm not going to, because the understanding, I feel like the understanding of something symphonic is, it's certainly, I think it's a rhetorical figure at this point. And we need to work with this history and we need to recognize it. So obviously, I think it just needs to naturally, the world needs to naturally run out of orchestras or reduce the number of them. But, I'll just let them take care of that themselves.
Things shift in music just as they shift in the world, and we don't have to think about it as a negative.
I just want to add a small kind of postscriptum to this, that I think it's also important for really musical professionals to be flexible. And that brings into play, an article, and there was a whole, online furor about the Guardian article, right? Musical literacy, right?
Yes.
And I wasn't sure if you were going to bring that up or anything like that. And there was a musicologist that, in a very emotional sort of stream of tweets, said a lot of things about, music theory not being under attack. And, to a certain extent, I completely agree. Because, when I confronted a couple of people that I, trusted enough to have a civil conversation, and, they were British composers, because obviously this is the UK
of course.
Situation that we're talking about, and I don't have the slightest idea of what's happening in the UK. There was a conversation. It has been acknowledged that there's an enthusiastic crowd and a scene, sort of, even with classical musicians and this traditional Western classical music and even modern Western classical music in the UK, preserved in the Oxfords, the Cambridges, the Durhams, and to which my reply was, but isn't that about the ratio of people who are currently interested in this? I mean, because those institutions will do a great job of, let's say Royal School of Music in London, something like that. I think they will do a great job of preserving the tradition. But I'm not exactly sure if we should be, desperately fighting to try to prove relevancy of something that is inherently classist.
Yeah.
And, it's just, if you grew up doing one thing, there's no reason why you, as a literate musical professional, why you can't requalify yourself to do something else. Yeah. Find a new passion project. So, hopefully I will, be willing to get with the times, regardless of the musical trends,
We talked about so many different things. Now a little bit about you, because I feel like I want to get to know you a little bit more. So maybe talk a little bit about your compositional process, how you put the different layers together, whether it's electronic with the solo clarinet or composing for a chamber ensemble. How do you go about just putting all of this together? Maybe a little bit about the process.
Yeah, sure. So there were a few things, and we have to keep this in mind that I would call myself like an adolescent composer, because I just turned 28, and I think I'm long before I will have a thing that I'm fighting for, with all my might. But for the longest time, I felt like my pieces, and I still feel like the successful ones exemplify this. I want each piece to focus around a little invention. Usually, it's a piece of material that I find fascinating, that the whole piece really works towards, and I want that little discovery, that the process of kind of highlighting this invention to really take up some time and make sense. So there's only one piece in my catalog that I have that I think is under 12 minutes. And that is just mostly due to the fact that it takes a while to make it come from a background into foreground and, kind of establish itself as something worthy. And also to do something dramatically that will make you feel as if you've lived through something. And there was just one piece from last year that I wrote for Ensemble Intercontemporain that I felt like managed to do this in, I think it's a 6.5-minute piece. It's a very short piece, and it's basically just a block of that invention that is decaying, but it's that entire invention's just dropped on you right away, and it just stays there, and it exists always. So then also for a long time I kind of couldn't come to terms with the fact that I like overtone spectra, and I really had to admit to myself that to some extent I am deeply connected to spectralism, and I love spectralism, and I think it's very important to me in it's just an understanding how mechanically instruments work, especially if I'm working with microtones or other logistics, and how to orchestrate tone and how to make a collective sound. So even if I'm working on a small chamber work, I think it's really essential for me to understand the overtone behavior of all the instruments that I'm working with, because that's where I usually will find that little X factor element. And recently it's going off of sort of this just classical tradition, I guess. I've been meddling with standards, I guess, like examining what it takes to establish a performance practice, like what is a performance practice and what is a tradition. And trying with my clarinet piece, I'm almost trying to simulate like a mini world, like a mini tradition that has a lot of its own specific things, and just trying to play with kind of like a model form, simulation for. I'm trying to examine different notations, possibly different methodologies, like pedagogical methods of how to teach someone how to do this. And hopefully this turns into my dissertation project, and I actually have a control group, and I can, play with people and see what we can do with it. And a lot of it, deals with just the embouchure, with the voicing, with the type of sound that we produce, which fingers come up in which order, something like how do you even think about the instrument? So in this particular instance, I'm thinking of of clarinet as a closed tube with holes, and I'm lifting fingers to raise pitch up from the fundamental instead of starting from like an open fingering and then putting fingers down. Just kind of thinking from the opposite approach, and trying to relieve the player of different stressors, like going over the break, maintaining the classical embouchure, something like that, playing with comfort and discovering that comfort zone, making the music inherently continuous. And when the breath runs out, then the player should fade out the sound and then replace that with the ingressive air sounds, and then and then so on and so forth. Wow. I just want to play with this with this continuity and solutions to it, and trying to play around with what puts on what stresses a performer, what will make this natural, what will make this immersive. And I'm really getting into these like large experience pieces. So I think for a while I was hoping that I would stop having these ambitious projects and start writing pieces under 15 minutes. Yeah. But I'm afraid they're only getting longer. So
that's a different challenge to keep it short, huh?
Yes.
You said about this big passages or long passages, and you take a breath. It made me think about circular breathing. Does that happen with clarinet players?
Well, it happens with clarinet players, and I can do it up to a certain register because I've never really particularly practiced it. I find it, I have certain tics, just like any player does, and my particular tics are sort of meaning, importance, and belonging of slap tongue in clarinet literature, period, as well as the strain and kind of the anti-musicality of circular breathing. And I'm not a particularly huge fan. I feel like it does impair the sound. It is extremely audible, and it almost makes me think of... I made a parallel, I think, in November or something, or October. I was at a concert, and I heard... It was almost a continuously circular breathe piece for close to half an hour.
Wow.
And I said something like, it gnawed away at my nerves, at my conscience. Like, it's kind of just hearing Trump sniffing at one of the debates. I think there was like one of those famous debates where it was just, you could just hear sniffing coming from that side. And it's so obtrusive that there were few cases, and of course everything can be, made very, very fluid and very, let's say idiomatic, but there are very few occasions, and I can, probably count on the fingers of my hands how many pieces I know that employ circular breathing to my liking, how many pieces employ slap tonguing to my liking, and so on. Yeah. So, but it's just a tick, and I wouldn't treat it as, like, I'm not against people doing it. They're free to do what they want.
Yeah. You said you were born in Belarus, and as I told you earlier before we started the podcast, I spent about 4 years in Belarus, including first grade, and later, when we went back to Armenia, I continued going to Russian school because my first grade was spent in Belarus at a Russian school. There are a lot of composers over the history that have incorporated, whether it be names or titles of their pieces or maybe some folk music in their compositions. Has this happened with you?
No, not at all.
Yeah.
Because I feel like if I recall anything or if I write about something, I really want it to be as abstract as possible and just convey the affect rather than the image of the actual place. And because I think the place is really irrelevant, and the object is really irrelevant to what I write. And there were a couple pieces that definitely dealt with memories, like childhood memories and sounds, but ultimately I really think they're universal. There was a piece that I wrote for Sinfonietta that got done at Spoleto that people got in the right mindset, and I feel like, and then there's the other one that employs more of like dacha, like nature sounds, just no electricity or like, barely any or something, but like you just hear these drones and the birds and the animals and the insects and stuff like that, but but ultimately it's all universal. And if I somehow manage to create that affect, that this is super nostalgic, if I'm able to create the air of that nostalgia, that's all that ultimately matters.
Any collaborations in Belarus? Because I know you've traveled all over the world, but has anything happened in Belarus?
Actually, there was a composer that asked me to play a clarinet piece of his, and I played it once or twice, and I recorded it, Alexander Litvinovsky. And yeah, he asked me to play the solo clarinet piece of his that was quite old. I think at this point it might be, I think it was 2008. I think it might be approaching 10 years or something like that. But that was great. But aside from that, actually, no one really got in touch with me or asked me to do anything or invited me back. But to be perfectly honest, I haven't particularly tried because right now I think I'm in this world of trying to address the problematics of the culture here, and I think there are different problems, and it's very difficult to kind of live outside of where your immediate surroundings. Well, I wouldn't feel like I have authority to really come to Belarus and propose my my current philosophy or something. I do not think it would be well received, and I don't think I want to meddle with necessarily what they have going on.
It's a weird thing, again, a childhood kind of a connection or whatever you want to call it, but I've always wanted to go back in some ways, and I hate to say this, but in some ways I feel like I should visit there more than Armenia in a weird way, because I've a certain connection for that 4 to 8 years old that I've spent there. It's some kind of a connection that I really would love to go back. And my brother and I, we always talk about going back at some point and visiting. You've done a lot of work with new music, and you also direct, from what I understand, a new music ensemble at the university. Is that correct?
At Brandeis, I'm just currently this year I'm the director of the new music series, but that's all it is. It's it's an inheritance that everyone gets in their second or third year, and I'm currently finishing up my third year. So so it was my time to do this.
But also something interesting I found on your Facebook as I was preparing to writing all these questions and just little ideas about you. I
think I know what you're gonna say. Yeah, going.
Is it the one about the pub? Playing at the pub?
I didn't even know you were going to bring that up. I thought you were going to bring up the death metal clarinet covers.
Oh, okay.
But that's a whole separate issue.
Both of them would be great to talk about if you have the energy for both.
Ah, sure. Why not?
First off, playing at a pub, something that we have been seeing more regularly from the so-called classical music or the academic musicians. How did that come about, and what are your ideas about playing at pubs and these unconventional venues?
Sure. So the way this particular, and this was, I think you're referring to the gig with Cantata Profana at Joe's Pub at the Public Theater in New York, right? So Cantata Profana is comprised pretty much entirely of my former classmates at Yale, and the ensemble was established, to sort of try to do, and I'm really afraid to use this word, but I do think this was an idea of do kind of well considered potpourri of early music, some Baroque and Renaissance music, and especially Second Viennese and some newer things. But originally, I think it was that connection to the Renaissance between the Renaissance and Baroque and the Second Viennese school. What I really like about being a part of Cantata Profana is that every once in a while there's a project that's maybe conceptually or politically not exactly my cup of tea, but every once in a while there's a piece that I wanted to play since maybe 10th grade, since my freshman year in college, and sometimes it's just really great idea, and it makes me really see a piece I previously didn't like in a completely new way. And I've had many revelations with them, and I think a variety of experiences, a lot of them really hectic, because we didn't have exactly enough budget, I think, for proper organization and proper help, proper managing directorship until very recently. It was we had to go through some trials, in creating these programs, and I think a lot of it is useful to just understand what goes into making a show and not just making a concert with a bunch of pieces on it. I think it's very program centered, and how to, and it's almost like this exercise, in discourse to connect the seemingly unconnectables. And the show at the Public Theater, I think Joe's Pub reached out to our artistic director and just proposed to do a couple trial shows, and they wanted to vary up the genres, the music that they were presenting, and because Cantata Profana played a variety of unconventional venues, our sister opera company, Heartbeat Opera in New York, they've done sort of these little boutique opera productions, like a drag production of like a Handel opera or something in an apartment, or like crazy things like that in galleries. And I think they did their gala on the High Line. So there are creative people in there that are from the School of Drama that know how to present something like that in the most unlikely places. And I feel like a lot of the classical concerts that I've heard about, when they were placed in these unlikely venues, there were all kinds of hilarities ensued. Yeah. As I recall, there was recently, I think, a chamber orchestra concert in Washington, D.C., where I think the conductor stopped the music and said something snarky to the audience. Yes, you have to take into consideration that you're playing at a pub.
Yeah.
That people will be eating, drinking, possibly not paying attention. But I really think that's what made it an interesting intellectual challenge. How to make the show and possibly introduce the pieces needing silence, pieces needing attention at the right time, so that the audience has had their fill of sort of entertainment, and now they're ready to consume something a little bit more thought-provoking, something a little bit more intellectually stimulating. And, and I can't say that this was not exactly a Pops concert. I really think it totally was, but I think there is something to be said for all kinds of niches, and I think it was a really interesting experience, because we ended up programming some VVA. I think I played a Donatoni piece, and all of that was sprinkled in between just pieces that played off of one another, and kind of like one little parameter idiom. So that was interesting. That was for sure. That was the first time I played, a cabaret style anything in my life, and it was certainly an adventure. So I took a very minor role. I was there to play. I didn't talk a whole lot.
Yeah.
I'm not well versed, I think, in that type of discourse.
Huh. Well, you're doing great in this conversation. So the medal, you were talking about the medal?
Yeah.
You want to say a few words about that?
Well, so of course I had my rebellious phase, I think, during both my bachelor's and my master's degrees, but during my master's degree in particular, and there was a very strict orchestra attendance requirement. Nice. And I couldn't leave a whole lot for gigs out of town, because it's right in the middle of the day, it's in New Haven, I can't really get anywhere. So, I was pretty bored, and I was practicing a lot, and, and even with a lot of practicing, and I feel like I exponentially got better during my master's year. So I'm actually kind of thankful that they tied me down. It made me get better. But, I was also running out of things to listen to, because I had so much time on my hands, really, to do a whole lot of things. A wave of nostalgia kind of came over me, and as in many places, I feel, in Eastern Europe, I came out of a clique, I think an area where heavy music was heavily listened to. And when I moved to Frederick, it had a very strong alternative and kind of like a metalcore scene, because the DC area and Baltimore with their grindcore scene and Relapse records sort of really close. So I was very much into noise, into doom, into like heavy drone, into like all kinds of technical shreddery, and I played in a technical death metal band, and I was a guitarist, and I was a vocalist for kind of like a necrophagist type band. So one day my roommate just saw me jamming along to, I think it was a Decapitated song or something like that, and he filmed it, and he created an alias for me, and he created a YouTube channel, and without my permission he posted the video. And then one morning he wakes up and he says, okay, I must confess, I posted a video of you 5 days ago. It has 200,000 hits right now. So I think you should just go and make a franchise out of it. And I think for just a few months I made a few covers, and I indulged myself in this fun little project. So and I can't say actually just because of the not that it was particularly. I mean, the genre is most certainly. I really don't want to badmouth it, but it's certainly not really that relevant right now, and it's definitely not at the height of its popularity. But back then, I really think there were enough people, especially in the classical music and the new music world, that listened to similar music, that some sort of crossover happened. And, I got in touch, a lot of people got in touch with me that I really feel like otherwise I wouldn't get to know. So it actually yielded me quite a few serious engagements, and engagements that I was very, very happy to do. And what I'm mostly happy with is that people were able to take me seriously as a serious musician, and I think that was part of my daily nightmare when I was sort of consumed with making the videos, is that, will anyone ever take me seriously after this? Am I sabotaging myself? Something like that.
As always, I'm left with many questions that I didn't get to, and I say this to all my guests. Hopefully we'll have you back at some point, but anything that you wanted to talk about that you didn't get a chance to talk about?
I don't so. Could you ask me one or two of those questions, actually?
Well, one of the questions is about competitions. I saw that you've participated in competitions, and I want to know, as a composer, such a subjective art form, why competitions? Do you trust the judges to judge what you do?
Are you talking about that I participated in composition competitions
Yes.
or clarinet competitions?
Both of them, sure, both of them. Why not?
Sure. I feel like as a composition competition thing, that is almost something that I feel like there's the dogma, I think, of the competition scene is kind of, it's just looming. And there is kind of an expectation of, sending your music to competitions. And I think I kind of didn't clarify to myself that I wasn't interested in writing music that just wasn't going to fit the usual framework of most things. And, just because I'm a student right now, if someone manages, not manages, that would be an awfully narcissistic thing to say, but if someone decides to, recognize me for an effort, I don't think I have authority to pick who likes my music and who considers it good and why they consider it good. Because ultimately, after I feel like I've done the work as a composer and work as a composer in explaining what I did, how it's being perceived is, it's not exactly my responsibility.
Yeah.
Because that's really out of my control.
Something you recommend to young musicians to participate in these competitions?
I mean, I would just recommend against entering anything that requires an application fee. And and there are a few occasions when the application fee actually goes towards something. Sometimes it's very small, and it's just kind of like a little support token that it's it's a small pool that results in a small prize.
Yeah.
Every once in a while, when it's an ensemble and and they use the entrance fee money to pay the winning composer, every once in a while, if they collect between $5 and $10, if I like the ensemble, I could support the ensemble, just because I want to support the ensemble. But very frequently, and I'm seeing so much of this with older organizations in the United States and many organizations in Europe, they're asking for entrance fees between like as high as €50, €75, and I don't understand what it's going towards because if they're not able to sustain themselves with ticket sales and
grants,
other kinds of business, I really don't see a reason for them to exist. And I would just refrain from applying to things that ask you to shell out a large amount of money.
And I completely agree with you. And this is the same thing with masterclasses and many other things. It's been tough, I've talked about this in previous podcasts, but it's tough to apply to these when you don't come from a wealthy background. And they do help and support these masterclasses and competitions. You succeed or you even participate. They do open doors in some cases, and for people who don't have those funds to participate, then they're left out. So it's I'm very happy you brought up that point. Last question before I let you go. What can we do as musicians, as composers, as artists for the future generations? How can we contribute? What can we contribute to help them and for them to have a brighter future in the world of music?
That's a very optimistic question, sort of encouraging an optimistic answer. I maybe will kind of partially answer it, and it will tie into into my answer to the previous question regarding the and what I said regarding application fees. Is that a lot of these opportunities and a lot of people that we meet, I think there are a lot of very socially adept people that work a certain way and open doors for themselves with their friendliness and ability to personally relate. And I think this would require a little bit of self-critique on part of hopefully most artists involved. And and I'm speaking I'm saying very utopian things here. I really don't believe that everyone will be selfless and everyone will be generous. But I do think in order for the marginalized, for the overlooked, for the underprivileged to really gain some sort of momentum, or even have a chance at getting at the same level of, let's say, of material worth. Let's face it, material worth. It's just popularity, performances, money, exposure. It's all material worth. But in order for certain people who are overlooked to get to that level, or be anywhere close to people in the establishment, it takes a little bit of selflessness and a little bit of generosity from the privileged to give up a part of their privilege.
Yeah.
I'm not saying that everyone should be overthrown and people should be stripped of certain things, but I feel like a lot of people are just simply not particularly open-minded, and people's defensiveness and insecurities play into the politics of how establishment becomes the establishment. And yeah, I would just like to see more people owning up to the fact, maybe some people who write very dense, very difficult to listen to, very technically demanding music admit that they like a couple bang in a can pieces. It would be nice for certain people who claim rap as garbage and it's not music to sit down with, I don't know, be a good record. I don't know. There are many. Just try to like something outside of their comfort zone, and maybe get into a mindset of being more stimulated by discovery and by the ability to relate to another perspective, rather than to perpetually consume the familiar.
Yeah.
Because I feel like that greed and that binge eating sort of is the downfall of a lot of things. I think people don't prize, sort of this. And in no way do I mean that listeners and artists should exoticize, the other, whatever the other art is for them, but sort of try to engage more in discovery and not even necessarily communicate. Just listen to what they have to say. Yeah, I think that would be very beneficial.
Well, Gleb, it's been great speaking with you, getting to know you. It's probably the longest podcast I've done so far.
That's because I love to talk so much.
It's great, and this is what it's about. I just want a place where we could talk about ideas and just discuss things, and it's working out well. And I'm learning a lot from the people that I invite to talk to me. Thank you so much for joining me. My guest today was Gleb Kanasevich, clarinetist, composer, all-around great musician, and hopefully we'll have you back at some point, Gleb.
Hopefully. Thank you so much.
Thank you.